Let's bring in the chairman of Reform Jersey, who is the leader of Jersey's only political party at the moment, although you may argue that there's a hidden political party somewhere else. Sam Mézec, welcome to the programme. What do you make of what we've been talking about and what's going on in Guernsey?
I've been paying quite a lot of attention to this, basically because I'm a massive geek and I pay attention to all of this sort of thing. Not saying that Chris is a geek, of course.
We're enjoying the conversation.
Yeah, that goes without being said, obviously. I found it incredibly dull. I think there's nothing inspirational about what's going on there, and that's a little bit surprising because the way that Guernsey electors vote for their states members is actually much better than the system we've got in Jersey. There's only one type of member, so there's nothing to get confused about, and they're all elected in decent-sized constituencies with members apportioned according to population. So the way they elect them is great, but then they know that when they get elected, they're then going to be sitting on these committees where there isn't really going to be a distinction between who is a member of Guernsey's Parliament and who's a member of the government. And so, to me, they sound like they're all just saying what they think they've got to say to get elected. I can't actually see any principle.
Don't all politicians do that?
Well, I don't think... in Jersey, at least, I think some of them don't. You know, for example, I'm a member of Reform Jersey. Reform Jersey is a left-of-centre party. If you're not a left-of-centre person, then we're probably not going to appeal to you that much. So I wear on my lapel where my politics are, and there's not really any room for me to knock on doors and pretend I'm something I'm not, because I'm wearing it on my sleeve. Other Jersey politicians, of course, it's different. But they all seem to be driving themselves towards where the perceived centre of Guernsey politics is, regardless of where the centre actually is. It's more about where they think the centre is. And it's incredibly dull. Why would you bother voting in a system like that when everyone's just saying the same thing? It's a waste of time.
Well, come on, talk about that. I should just say, breaking news, BHS has filed for administration, so clearly there's going to be an implication for the BHS store here in Jersey. Maybe we'll talk about that in a moment, because I know your Reform colleague, Jeff Southern, worked very hard supporting the workers for Woolworths.
Woolworths, yeah.
But we'll come on to that in just a moment. So this drive to the centre, Chris, is that something that you've perceived in Guernsey?
They describe it as, as we've been saying, consensus politics there, and they've always felt that as a whole, if you can't get something through and you can't get enough support for it, then why take it forward? So even if a committee for employment, housing and social security have got something that they'll be sounding out members, and if it's clear that the committee president and vice president can't get even support amongst its members of that committee, they're not necessarily going to get much through the states of deliberation. So, yeah, they talk about consensus politics. They talk about
is
not
consensus
having
another
any
word
power.
for inertia?
Well, I suppose the experience here in Jersey is that it produced the right result, we hear, every time in the States whenever that's because everyone had or lots of committees had a hand in developing a policy or something. But it took a long time.
Okay, Deputy Mézec, I'm intrigued. I mean, you obviously grew up with the old presidential system. You saw that as a youngster.
Oh no, they got rid of that when I was 14 years old. I can't really remember it in action.
Obviously, Chris and I remember it much more recently. Did it necessarily provide better government?
I don't think it did, and I think we're actually paying the price for a lot of the bad decisions that were made under that previous system. The most obvious one there is 010. 010, it sort of came up on the agenda under the old system before finally coming in 2008, and that is the single biggest mistake made by previous government system, which has led to the situation we face ourselves in today with a deficit of £145 million a year on the horizon. So
were we mismanaged under the old system? Is that what you're suggesting?
There were elements that certainly were mismanaged, and that goes back not just years or decades, but actually hundreds of years. There have been severe deficiencies in the way Jersey has been governed. And I sort of don't like this idea of consensus politics because, first of all, I don't think it exists. We're an island of 100,000 people. There are 100,000 different opinions on every issue. There is no consensus in Jersey politics on any subject, I think. And if you sort of operate under this misconceived view that you can have a consensus, it means there's no place for minority points of view.
Or debate.
And sometimes it's incredibly important to have minority points of view, at least have the opportunity for a fair crack of the whip, even if they're not necessarily going to win in the end. And often those minority voices, with the benefit of history, turn out to be right. And the example of that, I would say, is my Reform Jersey colleague, Deputy Jeff Southern, who campaigned for years and years against 010, and he said this will cause a black hole one day. And he was derided at the time, said, no, we're going for this model, and, he's just being anti-finance, he's just being anti-Jersey by putting forward this alternative point of view. And he's turned out to be completely right. So what we need, I think, is a political system that accepts the realities of the demographics of Jersey's population. So that means a fair electoral system so that we elect members properly. It means telling candidates when they stand for election, nail your colours to the mast, tell us where you stand. Don't let candidates get elected on this silly basis of, my dad was a businessman or I've been involved in this club for a while. It should be based on what you stand for, and the public can vote for that. And it gives a government the legitimacy and the mandate when it gets elected so that it can hit the ground running and it can actually start implementing for the people of Jersey instead of spending years coming up with policies after election like the current system.
But I suppose also this is where you probably would agree with Senator Gorst. At least you can have a good pop at him because he's been elected on a mandate, and whether or not he delivers on it, he's answerable to it.
Well, no, because Ian Gorst, and, I don't like the fact I have to say this, but his entire political career has been built on dishonesty, because he stood up before the electorate, before the last election, saying, vote for me and I'll reduce public spending and I won't increase your taxes. And he's doing the opposite on both counts. Not only...
He may well argue that the situation has changed since he stood up and made that pledge.
Well, and he would continue to be dishonest if he said that, because his plans to raise taxes on middle earners in the island began weeks after he was elected. You don't change your mind in weeks like that. He knew it before the election, but wasn't honest with the public.
Well, ultimately, then, as an opposition voice, then you can hold him to account, and hopefully, in your view, you would say that an alternative government could be formed at some point in the future.
I hope so, and that is where Reform Jersey obviously stands. We've got our platform and we've got our vision for how we'd like to see the island move forward in a positive way. But the biggest stumbling block we have is that, unlike Guernsey, we've got an incredibly unfair electoral system where St Helier is drastically underrepresented, and that's where a lot of Reform Jersey's support base is, because these are the people mostly who suffer from cuts to government spending, whether that's nursery places, whether that's pensioners' Christmas bonus, these sorts of things. Constables, the vast majority of them don't face contested elections. Senators, there's not really a place for them in the 21st century anymore. The last election was a complete waste of time.
And yet Guernsey's going to bring back concierges or some equivalent.
Yeah, but if you look at what Guernsey's Chief Minister and Treasury Minister are saying at the moment, is that they see moving towards an island-wide voting system in Guernsey would probably lead to party politics, and they are openly saying they support that. Now, if I were giving them some friendly advice, I'd say to them, OK, but form the party first before you move to island-wide voting, and then you're ready to hit the ground. So it's cart before the horse, then, is it? Yeah, exactly. They'd be ready to hit the ground running if they did that. So I think they've got things the wrong way round. But they're accepting that in Guernsey, their system would be much better if the public had the opportunity to vote for candidates knowing what their government mandate was, so that when they're elected, they can get on with it. And a great example of that is Gibraltar, which has an equal voting system. It's got full party politics, and when their government gets elected, they've got 4 years to really crack on. Their last government planned, designed, created and opened an entire University of Gibraltar in the space of 4 years for £10 million. If we did that in Jersey, it would take us 15 years and probably cost us £500 million. So you just goes to show, when you have a good government system, you can deliver for the people you're representing, and you can give them good value for money at the same time. So I think we need to look further outside the Channel Islands as well to get tips on how to move forward.
Stay with us, Deputy Mézec, because we're going to be joined by Harry McRandle in just a moment, a former JEP journalist. Chris Rayner, finally from you, what should we expect on Wednesday? Are we going to see a major change in Guernsey, do you think?
I don't know. I think that some of the things that have come out that I've been looking at, there's only about 5. There are only 5 female states members in Guernsey, and they've got a similar number currently of states members in their states. They've got 47 if you include the 2 Alderney representatives. So 5 out of 47 is.
And it's coming down to 37 states members.
Yes, moving down by 10. But they've got 19 candidates who are female in the coming election. A lot of the issues that they they have over there. I mean, they've got the PFOS issue, which is a very historic one here in Jersey, but with a completely different.
This was the foam at the airport, wasn't it?
Yeah. And also the current story about waste. Now, those are two issues where things have gone wrong in Guernsey with their government. Decisions have been made, or the questions are being asked about why they went down one particular route and not the other. So you may see that dissatisfaction with the government reflected in the vote this time. But there is a long list of candidates. Although they're reducing the number of seats in the districts from, say, 7 down to 6 in some and down to 5, there are a long list of candidates there. So you will see, I'm sure, as was a feature in our election last time round, there will be some sitting deputies who won't be getting back in. But as you know, some of the more experienced ones, such as former Chief Minister Peter Harwood, won't be standing again. Also, the Deputy Chief Minister, Alistair Longley, is stepping down as well. So people with long experience in the States are going. So it might be a new, relatively less experienced States that we see in Guernsey.
Chris, thank you very much indeed. There'll be more tomorrow morning on Good Morning Jersey. Chris Rayner, our political reporter. Stay with us because Deputy Sam Mézec is going to be joined by the former JEP journalist Harry McRandle in just a moment to talk about the future of government here in Jersey. I'd like your thoughts and comments too. You can join us on 720255. It's 28 minutes to 1. Let's check out some of the stories coming up in the news at 1 o'clock. Olivia Lepotvin is in our newsroom. Afternoon, Olivia.
Good afternoon, Matthew. Well, coming up in Jersey at 1 with me, BHS in Jersey will continue trading while it looks for a buyer as the company files for administration. The son of a man accused of a series of indecent assault charges has told Jersey's Royal Court the case is ridiculous. And workers in Jersey could fight their employer if they're forced to leave their job at retirement age. You can hear all about that and more in Jersey at 1.
Matthew Price
on BBC Radio Jersey.
27 minutes to 1 o'clock. Thanks to Olivia. Don't forget, of course, Charlie along between 1 and 4 this afternoon. We're talking about the system of government that we have here in Jersey and the system of government that they're going to introduce come Wednesday in Guernsey in their general election. In a moment, I'll be joined by Harry McRandle. My thanks to our political reporter, Chris Rayner. More on this conversation tomorrow on Good Morning Jersey. Staying with us is the chairman of Reform Jersey, Jersey's only political party, Deputy Sam Mézec. Before we talk about the structure of government, let's talk about this breaking news this lunchtime. It's been well signposted. It was in the Sunday papers yesterday. We've been talking about it all day. The future of BHS. I mean, a big store in town, a significant employer. It must be very disconcerting for people working for BHS this lunchtime.
Yeah, absolutely. Think of potentially all the jobs that are going to be on the line here. We've been through this before with Woolworths a few years ago, where my colleague Deputy Southern worked very hard to try and secure the interests of people who are leaving employment there. I'm personally a customer of BHS. I go there all the time to get smart shirts and stuff like that. It's a massive presence on the high street, and to lose that I think is going to be it's going to be really bad, and I hope something can be done to secure those people's work, to potentially get somebody new in to take over the premises as quickly as possible and keep these people on and keep delivering that service. But it's not very good when you see these household names like that disappearing.
Well, we thought the Woolworths was too big to fail, and of course, ironically, Woolworths was a very successful store in Jersey, but not nationally.
Well, it should have had a banking branch and it could have been bailed out by the government, but there we are.
So BHS, it's going to face some tricky times, and obviously our thoughts are very much with the staff at the moment. Let's bring in Harry McRandle, former business journalist. I mean, Harry, the business model of BHS has been broken for some time, hasn't it?
It certainly has. The high street itself has broken for a long time because of the competition from online and the ability for people to shop when they want to, and they're not restricted by time. But what I find very interesting about this from a Jersey perspective in particular is Philip Green's got his companies here. So what are we be able to...
But he sold it on, didn't he, for £1, remember? He doesn't own it anymore.
Yeah, I know, but it's just interesting that we got this juxtaposition of the great and the wealthy and the good seeming to move more and more to the island at a time when the world is changing. But I will agree with Sam here that I give Jeff Sullivan his due, because in past times he has fought very, very hard to get the equivalent of TUPE legislation eventually...
That's the protection of workers' rights, effectively, yes, if you're made redundant.
Eventually introduced to Jersey, because it wasn't there. And, I mean...
But isn't this a classic case of what Deputy Mézec was saying earlier, that sometimes the minority view becomes the majority view? We have a minimum wage, for example.
Absolutely. And, I've reported this stuff for donkey's years. This was my area, one of the areas of specialisation. And I found it quite distasteful at times, the amount of protection there was for business here in comparison to the amount of workers' rights there were. And, a balance always has to be struck, absolutely, but certainly we were miles behind and remain miles behind in a lot of areas of protection. In a society which, is a modern civilised society, we should be content to introduce protections that are commonplace elsewhere in the world, but still not be in a situation where you make it more difficult than it needs to be, and there's where the balance is.
So, and obviously we don't know what's going to happen to BHS, and it's a very unsettling time, and our thoughts obviously with the employees at the moment who've been doing a difficult job in difficult circumstances. But Deputy Mézec, will you and your colleagues in Reform Jersey be calling on the government to obviously offer help and support if it's required?
Yeah, absolutely, and this doesn't just go for BHS, but I think that the government here needs to construct a much better vision for the future of how it marries those two elements of providing infrastructure and support for businesses to generate wealth and to employ people, but also that balance with workers to make sure when they're in employment they are treated fairly, they are being paid properly for this. And often those two elements are seen as contradicting each other, but they don't necessarily have to. And what I'd like to see is people from all sides of the political spectrum come up with that vision of what it means to be both pro-worker and pro-business at the same time.
Do you think that can be achieved?
Oh, absolutely, of course it can. You just need the foresight and the acknowledgement that it's something you need to do. So TUPE legislation in terms of when businesses are transferred for their owners to make sure the workers' rights are protected, something that was introduced under Margaret Thatcher, yet when it's proposed in Jersey, it's considered some sort of left-wing thing, which is, clearly nonsense. I think we need to be going down that direction. Looking at the discrimination law, for example, is another one. But also marrying that at the same time with things like ending the ridiculous situation we have at the moment, where if you're self-employed, you pay over twice as much social security contributions as somebody who isn't self-employed on the same wage as you. Now, that's something that's got to be looked at as well, because that stifles people who are wanting to start up a business, who are wanting to take that risk and employ people. So there's all these sorts of things you can do, but you need to have that discussion, and you need a government that's actually motivated to do it.
Harry McRandle, you joined the debate this morning. We were talking about the future structure of government in Guernsey, but also looked at how it might impact upon us here in Jersey. And you think our current system's broken, don't you?
Yeah, I do. And I don't think there's significant enough accountability on ministers. That
They've all got to toe the line, you mean?
Well, it's more a case of we went from a committee system where Sam used the word earlier, inertia, and where we have effectively inertia, where we couldn't get any decisions that took.
But everybody looks back on those through rose-tinted spectacles. Everybody says
it wasn't. I can assure you again, and I know you were there as well, so we both can laugh at that one, where a committee would sit there for hours and sometimes days and months and meetings and then decide absolutely nothing, decide to do nothing. What's happened is, when the pendulum has swung almost completely the other way, when ministers have to make decisions, it's a legal requirement on them. Therefore, they don't get time to look at things properly. They don't necessarily get time to consider things properly. They end up following officer advice blindly because they've got so many things they have to do. And as a consequence, they just don't have the backup. And as a result of that, we are making bad decisions on a regular basis.
Such as? Which are the bad decisions
I
you
was
think?
just about to say, I'm not sure the decision is wrong, but the way it was done, Rod Bryan's recent one on nursery education. Now, that should have been well consulted. It should have been considered properly. The business community should have been involved in that decision, as well as parents. Now, that's the type of thing you would want a good consultation out there. And then when the policy is proposed, generally having support. And what Sam was talking about there, for me, is that just before, it's about working together in partnership within this community. Everybody's got a view. We have 100,000 views, no doubt about it whatsoever. But what we have to do is try and work out where the majority of those views sit.
No.
And if we can get an element of consensus on a policy, then we're likely to get adoption and buy-in and effective delivery.
Now, I know that Deputy Mézec sits on the scrutiny panel for education, so we won't go too far down that path. Nonetheless, you have a minister who's pretty sure-footed most of the time. I mean, look at his consultation on the new Les Kennevet school.
Absolutely.
Many would argue that was, textbook consultation. And yet he took his eye off the ball when it came to nursery places.
Yeah, and he went on holiday the moment the policy was announced, so there was a good few weeks where nobody knew what was going on.
And nobody was answering any questions.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody could ask any questions properly. I found, bear in mind, I share a constituency with Rod Bryan, so we attempt to go out there and convince the same people to vote for us, even though our politics are quite different. I look at this decision and I think of the many people who voted for him in our constituency, I can't imagine how many people were voting for him on the basis that they were looking forward to him making decisions like this. I don't think many of them did. I think many would have anticipated he'd have had a different approach to this. And I think that goes back to what Harry said, which is that often people get into these positions, so a minister where you're head of a department, in the case of education, a massive department, incredibly important because it educates our young people, and when it comes to trying to save off money, in this case £250,000, which is peanuts in terms of the education budget, I think it's more just a case of the officers looked at the balance sheet and went, yeah, there you go, that'll do, announce that, off you go. And that's not good enough. I think you need a much more holistic approach, and you need to be looking at education as a whole.
So it goes back to what Harry was suggesting, that sometimes you listen to your officers because they're the hired specialists, and they're the people with the insight and with the time. And sometimes perhaps you should challenge and question a bit more.
Yeah, well, I think that's where the weakness is. The ministers, and to be honest, I'm going to say something quite controversial here. I think the officers have set the system up so the ministers are pretty inept and don't have much power. What actually what needs to happen, in my view, is the ministers have some sort of external body, group, friends, whatever you want to call it, that can advise them directly, and the officers have to go through that almost like a filtering process. So you could say, oh, it's a committee, but it's not the committee in the perfect old system. It's something that is looking to implement ministerial policy, because what we haven't got at the moment, we've got the tail wagging the dog right now. The officers effectively come up with a policy, the ministers run around like headless chickens and then say, yeah, sign this. And a lot of the time, there's two ministers in particular, and if I named them, I know they'd be very embarrassed, but they have told me that they have signed things. I haven't got a clue what they're signing.
Well, then they shouldn't be signing it, surely.
They're just so busy. They're going.
Well, then the system doesn't work. Then, if they're too busy to actually make an informed and dedicated decision,
and that's what I'm saying. I'm saying the system is broken because they're not getting enough advice.
Does that concern you,
right
Deputy?
Way that allows the system to work effectively.
I think the point for me that symbolises this quite well is if you take a look at Deputy Anne Pryke, whose election manifesto said if she was re-elected she wanted to continue on as Health Minister, then the election happens, candidates are elected, they all get in their room to discuss who's going to get one job, and Ian Gorst says to her, sorry, but it's Andrew Green's turn to be Health Minister, he's got the better mandate than you for this, how about you do housing instead? Now, housing is a seriously big issue for the island because it's the #1 contributing cause of relative poverty in the island. She didn't get that job because she
it's
had
also
a
de
vision
facto our immigration policy as well, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And she didn't get that job because she had a vision to transform the housing situation in the island so that it made sure everybody's got a decent roof above their head that they can afford. She got it for political reasons, in terms of she was somebody who'd likely just be a loyal supporter of Ian Gorst and do what he was dictating to her or what the officers were dictating to her. Contrast that with other jurisdictions. I said, we should look at Gibraltar potentially as a jurisdiction. They've got a doctor as their health minister. Imagine that.
Oh, we've got a doctor in the States. What happened to her?
Well, she didn't have the political support, and that's because you can't just have high-calibre individual candidates. I think you need high-calibre candidates coming together as groups to say, right, here we are collectively. We've consulted with experts in the health industry. We've consulted with experts in the education industry. Here is our whole vision for the island. If you vote for us as a package, we'll get elected, and on day one we'll start implementing it. Manifestos shouldn't be ignored after elections. They should become a blueprint, and that means we need a system that forces candidates to be a lot more comprehensive.
Do we have a callback system then, where we say 18 months in, hang on a minute, how are you measuring against? I should sit here and look at your manifesto to see what you've been able to deliver against reforms pledges and so on.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely, I was saying before, there's not enough accountability. That's the problem in the system. So I would like to see some sort of charter that politicians themselves can sign up to, maybe 5 or 6 key points that they agree on. It doesn't necessarily I'm not sure Jersey wants party politics in its purest form, but it certainly doesn't want the party politics it's got now, which is a party that denies it is a party. And
Well, the Council of Ministers, effectively.
Yeah, effectively. I mean, there are people who dissent, and something that I did
But
contribute.
they're not allowed to dissent because they've got collective responsibility.
This is the point I made this morning that that brought me into the debate in the first place. The system is broken in that respect, in that you have. No, because you don't have party politics, you have collective responsibility. It means that some ministers are having to defend policies they vehemently disagree with. Otherwise, they have to resign and bring the government down.
Well, why don't they? They wouldn't bring the government down. Surely you're allowed to step aside because you disagree with something.
Well, you are, but what would be much better, and I'm amazed nobody has thought about it, because it's quite common elsewhere in systems and certainly in business and stuff, is a register of dissent, where you basically have the debate in the Council of Ministers. You say, I don't agree with that, I'm never going to agree with that. So you go and write it down somewhere where the public can see that you didn't vote for it, you didn't accept it, and you're under no obligation then to publicly support it. You're probably under an obligation not to publicly criticise it, to remain as a member of the Council of Ministers. But it means that when you go to the electorate, you can hold up the register of dissent and say, look, on this issue, I wasn't with the Council, but on all these other issues, I was. And so you can show where you've been individually effective and individually where you have differed from your peers in the Council of Ministers.
Final point for you, Deputy Mézec. If you sign up to be a minister in the Council of Ministers, you're signing up for collective responsibility. You know what you're letting yourself in for. These are grown-up men and women. Surely they know what they're doing.
I think the difference between Jersey's version of collective responsibility and other jurisdictions is that our collective responsibility is actually enshrined in law. Now, if you look at the UK government, it's all convention. There's no law that says if you disagree
Which
with
is why
the
they can now have this split for the European referendum.
Precisely. Now, that to me actually suggests that the reason we've got collective responsibility is because we have leaders who are so weak that they can't carry their ministers without it. In the UK, you are signing up not just to be a candidate, but you also know, broadly speaking, where your political philosophy lies. So if you're on the centre-left, you'll be part of the Labour Party. If you're on the centre-right, part of the Conservative Party. So you know philosophically you're probably going to be on board with what the government says anyway. And if you're not, and you have to resign, it's a convention. It's not in force. It's there because the system has sort of evolved in that way, so it naturally
And you're not cast
happens.
out into the wilderness. It's just dissent within your own political grouping.
Yeah, exactly, which is why I think Jersey shouldn't have a collective responsibility system enshrined in law like that. I think if we're going to have it, and we should have it because it is a sensible way of having a government, you know, you wouldn't have directors of a board going and implementing their own view when you've collectively decided, because, you know, business would just collapse if directors...
And so would government.
Well, yeah, exactly. So it's right to have a sort of collective responsibility, but not one that has no democratic accountability behind it, which is the system we've got now. So I'd say need a radical overhaul.
Harry, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think I agree with an awful lot of that we need to look at how we implement collective responsibility. Because it's so important going forward, but also we need to look at the accountability generally of ministers. They don't have enough advisors in some respects who are almost neutral. They are working in behalf of the public on a policy basis, and that really for me is a critical part of any new reform of government.
Thank you both very much indeed. It's been an interesting conversation. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Deputy Sam Mézec and former business journalist Harry McRandle, their thoughts there on the system of government here in Jersey.